Welcome to MSP Unplugged, Zero Trust Policy-Driven Security with ThreatLocker. I am your host, Paco LeBron. This is our live show where we discuss different ways to run your IT business, whether it's managed services, consulting, break fix, or anything in between. Let me go ahead and introduce our guest for this episode. We have none other than Danny Jenkins over at ThreatLocker, who is the CEO and co-founder. Danny, how are you today?
Good morning, Paco. Thank you for having me on today.
We appreciate you coming on and talk a little bit more about the company and what ThreatLocker does for a lot of the listeners here. But before we go into that, I would like to go ahead and talk about my favorite thing to talk about, which is TechCon Unplugged. TechCon Unplugged is going to be this September 17th to the 19th at the Aloft Chicago O'Hare Hotel in Rosemont, Illinois. There you'll be able to learn from amazing panels to help maintain and improve your business, meet vendors to find products and services that can save you time and money, similar to, because ThreatLocker will also be there, and rub elbows with your peers in the community. Feel free to go ahead, head over to the website, techconunplugged.com, and get your tickets now before they sell out. We do have very limited seating for our pre-function event, which is our Microsoft 365 boot camp that's being held by none other than Cyber Matt Lee. So tickets are $199. Hotel rooms are still available. We just updated the website where you'll have to contact the sales director because the block on the website is already filled up. But if you are looking to still come aboard and go ahead and stay at the hotel where we are having the actual event, feel free to go ahead and reach out to Christina, and her information is over there. So techconunplugged.com, feel free to go over there, and we hope to see you in about a little less than 3 weeks. So we'll go from there. All right. So Danny, really appreciate your time coming on here and talk about ThreatLocker. Why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of kind of your, what we would say, your 30-second elevator pitch on what ThreatLocker does?
Well, if you don't mind, I want to quickly tell you a bit about why we came about in the first place. Because that probably helps explain it a little bit better. Because there's a lot of products that have lots of bells and whistles, but ultimately we're here to solve a problem.
Sure.
And my background is in enterprise security. I've worked on ransomware recoveries. I've built security for big organizations, government organizations, healthcare. And one of the differences between the MSP world and the enterprise world is MSPs always tend to take security on a control approach rather than a we're going to find every bad thing in the world approach. And as an enterprise security person, I always had a problem in that my life was miserable. It was difficult. It was difficult to implement controls. They worked. Things like deny by default, application whitelisting, where we say nothing can run unless it's explicitly trusted, but it meant having this massive team to manage them. So I knew that this is going to stop ransomware. This is going to stop malware. And it did in many, many cases. When you think about the DoD, you don't see them having a ransomware attack because they've got so many controls in place. But I knew it was so difficult. So what ThreatLocker did, and what we did when we created ThreatLocker, we said, look, we need to bring enterprise controls to the rest of the world and make it so you don't need a massive team. And to the point of what does ThreatLocker do? Essentially, at our first level, we just don't let anything run on your system that isn't explicitly trusted. That means if someone downloads a game and you don't have a policy for it, it's not going to be able to execute. If someone finds a vulnerability like Eternal Blue and pushes out WannaCry, or a vulnerability in your RMM and pushes out ransomware, we're not going to let that run unless it's trusted by your list. Where ThreatLocker is magic is how we are able to achieve that without you getting a really bad headache. So, and that's where we've really come in. We've said, look, we're going to add application whitelisting. We're going to control what can run. And you're not going to have to spend days or months or weeks managing it or implementing it. We're going to expand on that so we can control what the applications can do. So we have this ring fencing where we can say, hey, Office can run, but it can't talk to PowerShell, even though they're both on the whitelist. Or PowerShell can run, but it can't see it doesn't have all of these godlike powers where it can see every single file on my network. And then we also get into other policy-driven controls like elevation controls. We can take away admin rights and storage control and things like that. But our goal is give you lots and lots of controls that are really easy to manage, don't affect the user, and ultimately stop ransomware and stop cyber breaches.
Gotcha. And then how long has ThreatLocker been around so far?
So as ThreatLocker as a brand, we've been around since 2017. So that's 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So just coming up on 5 years. We did actually spin out. We started off as more of an enterprise product for very static systems. So we kind of spun out of that portfolio as well. So a little bit longer on the product, as ThreatLocker is an endpoint security device, 5 years now.
Gotcha. Very cool. And then, and I think that, and for those that have not heard about ThreatLocker, I think you guys have been making waves probably over the last 2 to 3 years, especially with the biggest pieces and a lot of the exposure and talks that you've been giving in recent months, especially with everything going on. So you can correct me if I'm wrong. Your company or in ThreatLocker as a product is really kind of one of the few that are in the industry, correct? Like there's not really a lot of systems and able to at least do what the product can do on an SMB side of the house. Am I correct?
Yeah, and that's it. There's lots of products out there that are designed for the DoD who have 100,000 machines that are exactly the same and have an army people to manage them. There's lots of default deny whitelisting products and control products. But if you don't have that huge team, if you're an MSP and you're trying to manage 1,000 seats or 500 seats or 5,000 seats, and they're all different computers, there really isn't any viable products out there, because you can't keep track of every single application update and every different image of Windows, because today you're running 1607 and then you're running 1809 or 1903 or 20 something else. Every time I turn around, Microsoft's got a new version of Windows 10 out.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And then really, I think for us, as we are trying to adopt new things onto our stack or complement them in other ways, how would you say that your company would save an MSP or an IT business money and time by being able to adopt ThreatLocker as a solution?
Well, so first of all, I'll deal with the stuff where it's going to add time, because it will add some time into your environment. You're going to now go from an environment where everything is allowed, anything can run, to something that can't run. Now, that isn't that bad, because we track those updates for you. You might have some custom apps you don't have to worry about. You have to create some custom policies for. It'll create a standard policy, but you may have to modify them if you've got some weird payroll application. But ultimately, now you're going to say, okay, if someone wants to install a new Chrome extension or download a new program, they're going to have to request permission. That doesn't happen very often anyway, because most companies don't. IT people tend to install software all the time, but most normal people don't add new software to their company every day. Mm-hmm. So you're gonna add a little bit of time there, but that's a very simple process. Somebody requests access to something, and you get an email or a ticket in your PSA, and you approve it. It takes 60 seconds. Where you're going to save lots and lots of time. One is, just think about this. Imagine you send out a PC today, and in 5 years' time, it comes back into your service center, and everything is exactly the same. You don't have loads of Chrome extensions installed. You don't have loads of crap software installed. You don't have 14 PDF readers and free browsers and Dropbox. All of these don't require local admin rights to install, so they can still install them normally. But ThreatLocker is going to say, hey, we're not going to let anything run unless it comes through you. So you're going to get rid of all of those shadow IT issues. And if you look at your IT support desk, if you look at your MSP support desk, you're going to see a lot of shadow IT issues that wouldn't have happened if the user couldn't do this. The other area, of course, is malware viruses. This is probably one of the biggest areas you deal with. And then they're typically not small tickets. So if someone opens a ransomware, or if somebody installs malware, now you have this huge ticket. That's essentially should go away, because now the only way that something's going to be able to run is when you approve it.
Sure.
So your overhead, your general IT management overhead, is going to be much more controlled. You're going to have hopefully no breaches, but certainly a lot less breaches, because we're not relying on detection. And secondly, you're not going to have to worry about shadow IT. So these combined, you take away the two biggest areas of your IT support, and in exchange, you really secure your clients using what essentially is basic security nowadays, to use zero trust, to use whitelisting, use default deny.
Gotcha. So let's kind of expand a little bit more, because I think I think zero trust has really become a big topic in recent years. And I know that, ThreatLocker is probably one of the forefront, and at least in our space, that I remember you starting the conversation of zero trust and really understanding, as far as for a lot of MSPs, on this is a very serious thing to really take into effect. Diving into the question of how to improve MSP services, right, and adopting this, I think there's a lot of questions / kind of I guess the best way to say is like, zero trust is great, but it's going to be a lot of work. And I think that's a frame of mind that needs to be changed, because like you just mentioned, anything good, whether you're adopting a new tool or whatever the case may be, there's going to be a significant investment up front to have a lot easier time going on. Can you elaborate a little bit more on kind of what zero trust means to you guys and how you're helping achieve that for MSPs and IT business owners?
Yeah, and we do hear the word zero trust a lot, and it seems to be thrown into everyone's marketing arsenal, and including ours. And I want to explain what it actually means. It means, it was defined actually very clearly by the White House with the latest executive order. Zero trust means least privilege. It's not a magic. You can't have zero trust antivirus. You can't have, because it's the idea. It means least privilege, and it means continuous validation of those privileges assigned. And it doesn't just mean installing ThreatLocker and I'm now zero trust. It means the philosophy that you should follow, that I only give access to what and who is needed access to that program or that application or that document or that piece of data. ThreatLocker is a tool to help you get to zero trust. And we focus on the endpoint. We focus on endpoints and servers, and we focus on what needs to run. Nothing else needs to run. That means by default, our position is denied. Now, it doesn't look like that. It's not as scary as you think. You don't deploy an agent and then suddenly everything break. You can, you literally can and deploy ThreatLocker and turn off everything until you've manually vetted every single program. But what it normally looks like for us is you deploy an agent. It tells you, hey, this is what your environment looks like. Now, when you see that, you're probably going to get a little bit sick feeling, because there's going to be all sorts of garbage you didn't want in there. And let's create a policy set. We'll automatically create that policy set for you. So after a week of learning, you can now lock down. And this is what your environment looks like. Now, that's step one. That's ultimately getting towards your goal of zero trust. You're probably going to have a lot of things on there you don't want on there. Step two is, okay, these are the apps we actually need. So let's start removing things we don't need. So let's see, we found Angry Birds, we found Dropbox, we found TeamViewer. These are things we don't want in our environment. Maybe we found some malware. Let's remove those policies that we don't need. Step three is saying, okay, now the stuff we have that's needed, what does it need to access? Now, ThreatLocker is going to do some of this automatically during step one. So does Office need to call PowerShell? Does Internet Explorer or Zoom need to call PowerShell? So you can start limiting what they can talk to, what files they can access. So if you allow a program, you don't assume that program's good. You say, okay, this customer wants to run GoToMeeting, but GoToMeeting doesn't need to access my network share. So I'm just going to take that away. I'm going to give no trust to GoToMeeting more than it needs to perform its function. I'm going to give no trust to Exchange more than it needs to perform its function. So if the application is compromised, it doesn't eat all your data. Now, what we're doing here is, this sounds like a lot of words and a lot of talking, but realistically, we say 0 to 0 trust in 5 calls. So what we do for most MSPs is we onboard you. Now, the perfect MSP does everything they're supposed to, which is deploy the agent. So sometimes it ends up being 8 calls because they go, I got busy and didn't deploy the agent. But that takes 15 minutes. So,
sure.
But you deploy an agent in call, you do a demo and deploy an agent in call 1. In call 2, we're going to say, here's your environment. This is what it looks like. And we're going to simulate what would happen if you were in a zero trust environment. So you don't have to just turn it on and with your eyes closed. We'll say this is what would be blocked, and it's normally very little. So then we lock down your machines, so nothing can run that isn't already there. We then let that go for a week, and we teach you how to permit things. After the next week, you come back to us and we say, okay, what questions you have? Let's start looking at some more advanced ring fencing. We've already got the basic ring fencing, but let's start looking at more advanced ring fencing. So now we're at week 3, and these are hour-long calls. Week 4, we're now saying, let's look at your storage, because what we don't want is someone to come into your network without ThreatLocker and start eating your data on your network shares because they don't have protection. So let's start protecting your storage to make sure things can't access it, and let's start putting things in like USB policies if you need those. And then on the 5th call, we're normally starting looking at things like elevation. What programs need to run as an administrator? Can we take away local admin rights? Can we allow just those programs to run? Can we ring fence them to make sure that they can't bounce? Because one of the big challenges when you look at elevation control or privileged access management is you're able to bounce from an elevated app to something like PowerShell. So we make sure they're ring fenced and they're controlled as well. And that's normally the last part of it. Now, some people run into 8 calls. Some people do it in 3 because they're really fast. Their environments are smaller. But sure, typically, your upfront investment, if you do this right, should be 5 hours. And we're going to walk you through that. Let's just say 10 hours in the first 2 months to double the utilization. What you get back now, if you do it wrong, just so you know what wrong looks like. Wrong looks like your techs don't know you've implemented this. You're now stopping PowerShell randomly download things from the internet. They don't know to look at it. And they spend 2 days trying to figure out why their PowerShell script isn't working. And instead of actually going into ThreatLocker and saying, hey, I can make an exception for this in 60 seconds. But when you do this right, you're talking about 5 to 10 hours in the first 2 months. And you can onboard 1,000 seats, 2,000 seats. And of course, if you've got 20,000 seats, you're going to put a bit more time into it. We're going to walk you through the process either way.
Sure. So there's a lot there I want to unpack that we just ran through from there. One of the things that I have also heard is ThreatLocker has an amazing, I forgot the term that was used, but I would say library on mostly common applications that are running that have certain type of policies that kind of help with that heavy lifting. Is that true? Is that what we'll go through on one of those calls?
Yeah. So when the first thing that we do when we scan your system is we try and match the apps we find to what we call built-in applications. So we're not saying something's good just because it's built in, because TeamViewer is a built-in application. If your environment doesn't call for TeamViewer, you don't want it. But when you scan, we're going to say, okay, we're creating these policies for you. We found Office, we found Chrome, we found ConnectWise Automate, we found Kaseya. Let's match them to our built-in definitions. Now, why that's important is 2 reasons. One is you get the confidence it is what it says it is, and it's not some fake version. The other reason is when it updates, we're tracking those updates. And the biggest one of those is Windows updates. Microsoft runs updates every patch Tuesday. We had about 80,000 unsigned files into our Windows definition from just Windows updates alone. So we take care of all that for you. We've got about 450 of those that we track updates for. I think 1,200 plus that we have predefined libraries for, but 450 self-updating applications. Anything you push through your third-party patch management is going to be in there. That's going to reduce your overhead. The other thing we'll do is when you do onboard, we'll suggest, hey, there's 5 other meeting apps that you don't necessarily have, but maybe you want to allow them because they're the type of things that somebody says, hey, I'm starting a meeting on GoToAssist or GoToMeeting. Let me get this in now. So you can pre-approve them and they're already predefined in your policy set.
Gotcha. And then as far as when implementing, because I know for me, when we tried to do this, I mean, this was probably 2 years, 3 years ago with another product, I think the biggest issue that we had was like Ring Central, right? And it was one of those where they had all these different calls through API calls to try and access whatever the video call center and things of that nature. So that's exactly what you're referring to, right? Like with the example of Windows updates, they have all these additional files or calls that are trying to go through. Your team is equipped to be able to analyze to see if this is a common occurrence and helps update that along as well. Plus having us the ability of marking it as an exception as we review it too.
Yeah, and you can also like learn an application. So Ring Central is a good example because, and I think we have a built-in for Ring Central, but let's just say we didn't. I'm actually certain we do because we're rolling it out ourselves. So you roll out Ring Central and it's got 200 or 300 files. So what you can do as well is you can put like a computer into learning mode and you can have a test machine for this or your own machine. You can deploy an app and you can put it in like a learning mode, figure out what this app needs to talk to, and it will catalog it for you. So then you can use that across your clients. So if you do have some strange dental software that gets used across all your clients, you just have to do that update once on one machine and then it'll be allowed by all of your clients, which is nice too. Another cool point is because you brought a Ring Central, we're actually rolling it out internally and we have a lot of remote salespeople. And when the problem is we don't want to connect to every single one of their machines to deploy Ring Central, and they're not local admins. So we created a policy to allow Ring Central. But what we did as well is we said, hey, I'm going to allow the installer to run as an admin for the next week because I've got my sales team rolling it out. So then we emailed all the sales team, most of which ignored us, but that's a different issue. Saying, hey, you have to download this link, run it. And when they download it, it's already on the whitelist. We've already pre-approved it. It's already allowed to run as an admin. So even though they're not an admin, it just runs the installer as an admin. It allows it to install on their computer. It's very, very seamless.
Very cool. Very cool. And then really throughout this whole conversation, ThreatLocker really can complement what any MSP or IT business owner is offering in their stack. Is there anything that you would say, and you could say, you can choose to answer this or not, that it could actually replace? Because I think a lot of us tend to focus on, we need AV, we need EDR, we need a lot of these great tools, but not really understanding like what are they really doing. And I think they're just hearing, you got to deploy the best and greatest of this, and you're going to be helping with the mitigation. Have you seen anything where you said, hey, you know what? I think that if you had ThreatLocker and X, you should be well above where you're at? Or is it more of, hey, I think ThreatLocker is really a complement to what you currently have as your current stack, because it just adds that additional layer for protection?
So essentially, and it's an interesting thing, because some of the products, and I won't list individual products, but an EDR that we exist with most, we also displace more than anything else. So if you think of security as a triangle, and this is what I would say to someone, you've got 3 angles to stop any security threat. If I was to send malware to you now, if you don't open that malware, the threat's gone. It's being foiled. And we call that the human angle. So people often have awareness training. You know, we get a nice big axe and chop off people's hands. That works as well. But there's certain things you can do with the human element of security.
Sure.
The other area, which is where a lot of MSPs tend to invest, is this concept of detection. And the idea with detection is you say, I want to try and look for something that's bad. And there's lots of different ways they can do that. They can have an antivirus, which is the basic level of detection. They can have EDR, which is going to do post-breach detection. You can have threat hunting. You can have, on the email level, you can have email scanning and web scanning coming in to try and get it from perimeter. And all of these are looking for bad things. Now, in some respects, a lot of them overlap each other. So what we often see as the MSP space is they had an antivirus and they got ransomware. So they added an EDR and they still got ransomware, and they added some threat hunting, they still got ransomware, and they keep adding lots of layers of detection. And I kind of liken that to adding 3 house alarms into your house, 3 burglar alarms. You've got contact sensors, you've got motion sensors, you've got glass breaking sensors, but you didn't lock the front door. So someone can still walk in, take the TV off the wall and walk back out. Where we sit is this idea of control. So back to that triangle, you have 3 angles to defend from any threat. We're talking about the endpoint: user, human, detection, and control. Sometimes what we see is people lighten up their detection because they have nothing in the control department and add to that. Others just add us in. So sometimes we do displace something in the detection area, but that's not really our goal. We're not here. You don't call a locksmith out to say, put a new lock on my door, and him say, oh, you don't need your house alarm now, or you can remove one of them. But yes, in some areas, people have overinvested there and underinvested in the control elements. Balancing out that triangle is a good idea. Of course, if you can have 5 layers of detection and 5 layers of control and 5 layers of human, that's great as well.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great perspective too, because I think a lot of us, like I mentioned before, we're just hoping we're going to get this silver bullet and we're okay. And there's not a lot of effort put in place to, 1, research your own tools, but 2, to really understand policies. And that's exactly what you've mentioned, is that there's a lot more into getting into this space than just buying a tool and you're all set. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, one thing to think about when you're thinking about controls is controls are the only thing that you have that is inside your control as an MSP. So if that malware gets opened by you or the user, you have no control as an MSP. You have no control over whether your AV or your EDR is going to detect it before it eats your lunch. You do have control when you use whitelisting, ring fencing. These are tangibles, they're absolutes that you have control over. You control what can come on the whitelist. The same applies when you think about phishing emails. You have no control if your email filtering will detect that phishing link. You have no control over the user clicking on it. You can train them. I've been trying to train my dog to sit for a long time and he just doesn't do as he's told. And sometimes it works and you can reduce your risk. But you do have controls over things like dual factor authentication. So that's another example of a control. It's an absolute that you say, okay, they gave their password, they put the email didn't detect it, but I can guarantee that my dual factor is going to stop them logging into my Office 365 account. So when you do think about security, and maybe this is my enterprise background, I always like to think from controls, and then you think about additional things. You say, okay, I'm denying all the ports on my firewall, I'm opening what I need, and then I'm going to add IDS or IPS in, and then add human training in, things like that.
Sure. Is there any cool success stories that you want to share that, if it wasn't for ThreatLocker, for a partner of yours currently, it probably would have been pretty bad news that you could share?
Yeah. So I'll give 3 very quick stories. Obviously July 4th. I mean, that was probably our biggest success story. The end of the day, things happen. Software has vulnerabilities, and any software you run can be used against you. Sure. We had 45 partners that had ThreatLocker deployed and were secured. and blocked every piece of ransomware that went out to all of their clients. We had one who had just deployed. They were still in that learning period. It marked as this would have been denied. That's unfortunate. But I think that's a huge success story. The end of the day, have dual factor, make sure you're buying from good companies, ask them about their SOC 2 and their security standards, but also accept that when I install software, there's a risk. What can I do to mitigate and reduce that risk? And that was a huge way we did that. Two more isolated ones, which I think are probably interesting. I got one email from a client, I'm going to say 4 weeks ago now. My time is going and blurring. And they sent an email and they said, this is the first time I've seen ThreatLocker valuable for blocking good software. One of their users had got a pop-up in a web browser saying your computer's infected with a virus, or you have to call 1-800 to speak to Microsoft. They said it was Microsoft. They called, the users got through to someone in India, and the Indian guy said, hey, I need to get on your machine. This is Microsoft. Your machine's infected. Your data's going to be lost. So they sent the user a go to assist link, and obviously go to assist got blocked because it wasn't on the list. They hit request from the MSP. They put in, hey, Microsoft's trying to get on my computer. The MSP called them and said, hey, what's going on? Microsoft's not trying to get on your computer. Microsoft's not that nice. So that was kind of a unique one. The other one was, had a client, RDP open to the internet, which is never a good scenario. Regardless of whether you're on ThreatLocker, just don't do that. 3 days, somebody was on their server. Now, interestingly enough, I do recommend if you use ThreatLocker, set your servers up to alert you if something gets denied, not wait for the user. When you're dealing with desktops, you don't want to get an alert every time someone tries to do something, just when they hit request. But in this case, the user kept trying to run ransomware. They kept trying to run advanced IP scanner. It kept getting denied. In the end, they just said, hey, I'm just going to try and hit request access and see what happens. The MSP got an email saying someone's requesting access to Mimikatz. And they were like, what's Mimikatz? And we're able to go back. We're able to see it wasn't good. They were on their server for 3 days, but they weren't able to run anything after 3 days. And, there was no loss there, which was fantastic news, I thought. It would have been better if they'd set it up to alert on the denied to begin with, so they could kick him off day one. But the fact that 3 days, some guy sitting on your server and couldn't run what he wanted, it's been pretty frustrating for him.
And then really one last quick question before we take a quick break before rounding out the show. Does ThreatLocker, it sounds like you have a lot of amazing logs to be able to kind of monitor a lot of this information. Do the partners have access to those same logs that you would review, or is this something internally you can help assist them on trying to figure out what's going on?
Yeah, everything, and there's two parts to logs there. Everything that happens in our system is logged, and you can see that there's something called under security, there's a system audit. So every time somebody logs in, their IP address, what country they're logged in from, what pages they viewed, what they changed, whether we do it on your behalf or you do it, you can see all that data, and you can control who, whether it be us or whether your customers can access it. The other area is every file, every document that's moved, every executable, every DLL. If someone copies something to a USB drive, deletes something from your server, all of that is logged within a minute. If you're sitting in Starbucks copying things to USB drives, you're going to be able to see that on your input, on your centralized logs within a few minutes.
Very cool. Very cool. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll just come back to just talk about any additional items that we may not have covered, or just lasting thoughts that you may have. For those who would like to support the show, we have been mentioning over the last several weeks about our Patreon link, but this week we're going to make it a little bit a different request. We ask that you leave us a review on your favorite podcatcher. This is going to help us be found by other like-minded listeners. We've been on the rebranded name of MSP Unplugged now for about 2 years, and we're just hoping to go ahead and get a couple more new reviews onto this feed that we moved from the previous name. So if you head over to either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music, definitely go ahead and feel free to leave us a review. All right. So Danny, I think we had, a lot of great information. We've really, I'm sure we just only touched the tip of the iceberg on scratch the surface on what ThreatLocker can do. Is there any additional details or just any lasting thoughts you have on why someone should reach out to your team, get a demo, and really understand that, this product is probably going to be a very good fit for them to kind of adopt?
So we're in a world now where you can't rely on, viruses aren't what they were 20 years ago. Malware isn't what it was 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. It destroys businesses, it steals data, and you can't win this fight without putting in proper security controls. And whether you want to do whitelisting or ring fencing through ThreatLocker, or whether you want to do it through someone else, I'd encourage everyone first, you've got to do this. It's not an option. The federal government's mandated, and more standards are recommending and requiring it. It's the best thing to do. ThreatLocker is going to make this really easy for you as an MSP. The onboarding is really simple. We hold your hand. We have multi-tenancy. Everything is centralized. And we back that up with 24-hour support based here in Florida, 30-second response time. You can click Get Help from a Cyber Hero. You can get on a Zoom session within a minute at 24 hours a day, 2 a.m. on Christmas morning. If you want to get on 2 a.m. Christmas morning, I feel sorry for you. But if you want to, you can come in. They're there. Someone's sitting here in our SOC, and they're waiting for anyone who needs help. And I'm sure every vendor says this, but we genuinely are a great company to work with as a partner, and we help you with everything from your onboarding to your lockdown, and then we're there to back you up within minutes, not within send a ticket and we'll come back to you in 2 weeks.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Again, really appreciate you coming on the show. I believe we will see either you or someone from your team at TechCon in a couple of weeks. You've been gracious enough to help support us in our event as well. And then we'll definitely have either you or someone from your team again on an additional podcast after the event. So
I'm pretty sure it's me who's coming to Chicago in a couple of weeks.
Okay, perfect. All right. I will wait to get your headshot and all that, so we can get that website updated. But yeah, no, really appreciate you coming on and really talking about ThreatLocker. I know we've kind of interacted over the last couple of years. Glad to finally get you on the show. And if anyone wanted to reach out to you or just to reach out to learn more about ThreatLocker, what's the best way to do so?
So a couple of things. One is we do have a group demo this week. I think it's probably posted on our website, so you can go in and you can schedule for a group demo, or you can just schedule a one-to-one demo. If you go to our site, click schedule a demo, we'll schedule, you'll get paired up with an engineer. I know the calendar's about a week out unless you get up really early at the moment, but just book it as quick as you can, and then you get on the calendar as quick as you can. They will walk you through the entire process. They'll get you started. They'll give you any kind of pricing. They'll answer any questions you have. The group demo is happening, I can't even remember the exact day, but if you go on our website, it should be posted there to sign up for the group demo as well.
Very cool. One question I did miss from the chat that I just say you to come over. Are there any commitments or contracts / requirements to enroll with ThreatLocker?
So typically our minimum is 100 seats, but we can waive it if you're a smaller MSP. So if you've got only 20 seats, we'll do 20 seats if that's your stack. We do ask for 12 months. What I would suggest, nobody's ever trying to get out of a contract with ThreatLocker because it's great. What I would suggest is we have a trial. You don't need to come in and pay us anything. Get it deployed to your clients during the trial period. First thing you should do at the end of your demo is just deploy it across your entire stack. Even if you don't lock them down, you can simulate what work you'd have to do. You get that month to play with it before you even have to make a decision. And then we ask for 12 months. And the reason we do that is because we put a lot of effort into onboarding you too. Sure. We don't want, it's more of an expectations thing that, look, we're going to invest those 5 to 10 hours, we're going to invest with you. We're going to put one of our engineers on a call with you to make sure that everything goes smooth. So if you go and deploy 20 seats at a few dollars an endpoint, that doesn't really, and last a month, that doesn't really work out too well either side. So that's the only commitment side we have.
No, that makes sense. I appreciate it. Again, Danny, thank you for coming on the show. For those that want to listen in on the show, today is actually a special episode. We are normally on Tuesdays at noon Eastern, 11 Central. So feel free to come join us over on the chat room. You can head over to youtube.com/MSP Unplugged. Click subscribe and hit the notification button so you never miss an episode. So when you have something like this of a special episode here, you'll be notified and you'll hear it as well. Also, we are always on your favorite podcatchers, so feel free to use your favorite podcasting app wherever you go. We're on, again, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, to name those big three. Feel free to go ahead and listen to the audio version as well. We are on usually the following Monday that gets live from there. We thank you for listening, and we will see you next time on MSP Unplugged.
Thank you very much for having me today.